Hello and welcome back to BOSH tutorial series. This is Jamil again. In this video we're going to go through the concept of a BOSH deployment, what is it, and how to create one. This video will only cover the concepts, the theory behind the BOSH deployment, and we're going to leave the hands-on session for the next video. And before we start, a quick note. I created this GitHub repo. It contains a README file which contains a videos index for the videos that we created so far. I'm gonna add this link to the description, so please feel free to go there if you want to pick and choose the video that you want to watch and the topic that you want to cover. And each one of the videos has the target personas that is most suitable for. And I'll be adding this link to the description of the video. So let's get started. A quick recap regarding the previous videos of what we have so far. So in the previous video, I think what we did is we created a BOSH VM and we talked about the BOSH VM and we went into the BOSH VM. So let's imagine at the beginning of this slide, we have a BOSH VM that we created and we have a CLI and we're interacting successfully with the BOSH VM using this CLI. And what we want to have desired at the end of this tutorial session, at the end of this video, what we want to have, let's say we want to have 3 VMs that BOSH creates for us somehow. So this is the desired state. We want to have 3 VMs and we want BOSH to create it for us. How can we do that? Let's take an example to make it simple. Let's take that we're going to have it on AWS. Let's say we want to create those VMs on AWS and BOSH, we installed it on Amazon AWS. So let's take a step back. Let's say we want to do those, or we want to create those VMs manually. I'm going to assume, let's say that you have maybe a small experience with Amazon AWS, not too much, just a basic knowledge. Let's say we want to have 3 VMs. What we need to know before we create those VMs? Let's say number 1, we want maybe to have the virtual machine type that we want to have for those VMs. Let's say maybe we need to have all of them T2 large or T2 small, or one of them mix and match. We want also to create probably a subnet, or we want to have a subnet so that we tell the VM which subnet to be included in. We want to have an OS image. Let's say sometimes, like, do I need Ubuntu, do I need CentOS, do I need maybe Ubuntu that has HA proxy, etc. We want to also provide the availability zone. Let's say, is it going to be US East A, 1A, C, B, etc. To place the VM in. We also need to probably, if we want to install software in those VMs, we want to provide that software somehow after we create those VMs. And maybe we want to SSH and then SCP this software into those VMs and run it. We also probably want to know how many VMs we want to create at the same time. So you can see that there's a list of things that if we want to do those things manually, if we need to create those VMs manually, we need to know. From this list, we kind of start to probably know that what things we need to provide to BOSH, or maybe BOSH will tell us, or BOSH will help us provide whenever we need to create those VMs. So if we take the previous list and look at it a bit with a different perspective right now, we can probably separate those items as an example into 2 sections. Ones that are IaaS related, which is basically AWS related, that either AWS somehow need to provide us, or we need to configure on AWS. And some of them are a bit more user specific. Those are a bit maybe loose terms, but let's actually discuss it. So let's say maybe take the first section, which is the IaaS related items. For example, the virtual machine type, let's say T1 small, T2 small, large, etc. Those are, you can say this is a IaaS specific. This is, let's say, Amazon specific property. Also, for example, the network, the subnet to add the VM to, We probably need to create that subnet somehow on AWS, and it's the AWS configuration, and we need to provide it. So this is also related to the IaaS. OS image, in this scenario, you can put it in both ways, where you can say that maybe the IaaS will provide me an OS image, but also maybe the user can provide an OS image. In this scenario, because the OS image that we're talking about is a stem cell, and we already talked about the stem cell and what does it represent in BOSH, we're going to assume that the user will provide that stem cell. So we're going to put it in the user specific items, provided items. Let's say if we don't want to talk about the availability zone, this is also something related to the IaaS itself, specific to the IaaS. Let's say if we need to install software, probably the user need to provide that software. So we're going to put it in the user specific items bucket. As well, let's say how many VMs you want to create. This is something that the user need to specify. So you can see just the separation, a bit of the separation between an IaaS related items and IaaS agnostic items. From those two categories, we're going to introduce something new which we didn't talk about yet. And we're going to introduce today the cloud config. I'm going to read the description what the cloud config is from the BOSH.io website, and then we're going to explain it. So the cloud config is a YAML file that defines IaaS specific configuration used by the director and all the deployments. It allows us to separate IaaS specific configuration into its own file and keep deployment manifest IaaS agnostic. So what does that mean? As it has mentioned, a cloud config is nothing but a YAML file that we provide to the director somehow. That YAML file, it contains the IaaS specific configurations that we talked about. Some of them we talked about in the previous slide. So for example, as you can see here, let's say we have the VM types in the snapshot that we have. Let's say also we have the the VM types, and then we have the disk types. We can also have some networking definitions as well. So you can start to see that here we define something that is IaaS specific. Let's say I want to use a T2 micro, and I define it as a small VM type, or I want to use an M3 medium V instant type from Amazon, and then I define it in the cloud config as a medium. So this cloud config is nothing but a collection of those IaaS specific configuration. We have one cloud config. We're going to talk about later on that we can have multiple at some point, but now let's assume we're going to have one cloud config that we defined all those IaaS specific configuration that will be referenced somewhere else, and that somewhere else will be the deployment manifest, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. I will not go into the details about what are the sections of the cloud config. We're going to have a separate video, which will be the next video about this, and then we're going to go through each segment and then explain what does it do. So just a quick recap, a cloud config is nothing but a YAML file that has the IaaS specific configuration. For example, the VM type and the disk type. Now, let's talk also about the deployment manifest. We already a bit covered the deployment manifest in the terminology that we have, but I'm going to read the actual definition from the BOSH.io website. The deployment manifest is a YAML file that defines the components and the properties of a deployment. When an operator initiates a new deployment using the CLI, the director receives a manifest and creates or updates a deployment with the matching name. So what does that mean is, a deployment manifest is a YAML file. Let's say we have a desired state where we want to have 3 VMs, and we want to install, let's say, Apache Tomcat on each one of them. That's where we define this desired state in the deployment manifest, where we will say somehow I want 3 VMs, and those VMs they need to have Tomcat on it. This is the user specific desired state that the user will provide to the director. Now, I will also not talk about the deployment manifest in details about the sections. That will be in the next video after the cloud config. and we're going to cover it in details and its different sections. But for now, let's assume that this deployment manifest is nothing but the desired state that the user want to have, and it's the deployment specific state. So it has nothing to do with the definition of VM types or disks. Those will be only referenced inside the deployment manifest. So let's say if we want to have 3 VMs on top of Tomcat, we're going to say that I want a VM type small or medium that I already defined in the cloud config, and then I'm going to reference it here, as we're going to see later on. So this is the deployment manifest. So we saw that for now we have the cloud config and the deployment manifest. The cloud config is the IaaS specific properties, and the deployment manifest is the deployment specific configuration that we're going to have. Now, what we do, let's say we have those 2 YAML files, the cloud config and the deployment manifest. What do we do with them? This is where the the first step of a deployment start. We will be providing those 2 files in separate ways through the BOSH CLI to the BOSH VM to tell the BOSH VM what to do. So first we're gonna see that we're gonna upload that cloud config file. We're gonna save it in the BOSH VM through the CLI, and then we're gonna initiate a deployment by providing a deployment manifest that will tell BOSH, this is the desired state that we're gonna have, please make it happen. So we need to provide those 2 YAML files through the BOSH CLI to the BOSH director in the BOSH VM. And let's say this is the result. We're going to have those 3 VMs, and we need to start to think about a deployment manifest as the desired state that the user wants to have. So for example, let's say we have nothing yet. We only have a BOSH VM, and the user desires to have 3 VMs or 10 created with specific software on them. The user will just craft that desire inside the deployment manifest, and then it's going to send it to the BOSH VM, and BOSH VM will make it happen somehow. It will make sure that every requirement specified in the deployment manifest is validated and set, and make it happen if everything is valid. So as a summary, to keep it short, what we have talked about in this session, in this video, is the cloud config. And we talked about the cloud config as the IaaS specific properties that we're going to define and we're going to reference in the deployment manifest later on. We talked about the deployment manifest, and it's the desired state that the user wants to have. Let's say it's X number of VMs with X software on them. And this is the desired state. So the deployment manifest is the desired state that the BOSH director will make it happen. So this is a quick summary of what we have, and in the next session we're gonna dive into the details of the cloud config, all its properties and most of its properties as much as we can go through, and the sections and what each section means. And in the video after the cloud config video, we're gonna talk about the deployment manifest and all its sections, and after that we're gonna have a hands-on example about our first deployment through creating a number of VMs through the deployment manifest and cloud config. Thank you very much. Hopefully that was helpful, and please check the description for the link for the GitHub repo that has the list of those videos, so that you can pick and choose any video that you want to watch. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.